You know that person who just goes silent when something stings them? The one who says, "I'm fine," and means, "Don't come any closer." Maybe that person is you. If it is, stay here, because you're about to feel unusually understood. That quiet isn't coldness, and it isn't some broken wiring. There's far more happening underneath it than almost anyone gives it credit for. The world calls the silent ones closed off. Science calls it something else entirely. And here's what almost nobody ever told you: that silence isn't a defect. It isn't emotional immaturity either. According to psychology, what your brain does when it hurts is one of the most intricate emotional responses a human nervous system is capable of. The only reason it was never explained to you is that most people simply don't have the words for it yet. Not because something's wrong with you, because something's deeply right. Let's start with the misunderstanding almost everyone has about you. When you go quiet, people assume you made a choice. That you sat down, ran the numbers, and decided to lock them out. Like it's a strategy, a move for power. But that's not what's happening inside you at all. When you're hurt, something in your body shifts. Nothing dramatic. More like a door closing quietly. Words become harder to reach. Your chest gets heavy. And the idea of opening your mouth to explain something you haven't even sorted out yourself feels genuinely impossible. That's not you being difficult. That's your nervous system doing exactly what it was built to do. There's a researcher, Dr. Peter Levine, who spent decades studying what stress actually does to the body. And what he found is that the freeze response is just as hardwired as fight or flight. It isn't weakness, and it isn't avoidance. When emotional pain is too big to process all at once, your brain pulls the emergency brake. It slows everything down to shield you. And here's the part that genuinely stopped me the first time I read it. There's a region of your brain responsible for producing speech, and research shows it actually dims during emotional flooding. So when someone's in front of you saying, "Just talk to me, tell me what's wrong," and nothing comes out, that's not stubbornness. Your brain has physically made words harder to generate because it's busy with something more urgent, holding you together. You're not pushing people out. You're holding yourself in. And those are two very different things. Now here's where it gets interesting. This didn't start recently. Nobody was born like this. Babies wail at full volume. Toddlers collapse on the grocery store floor without a second thought about whether it's appropriate. Kids express pain loudly, openly, and without apology, until something teaches them not to. At some point, something taught you that showing your hurt out loud wasn't safe. Maybe it was a house where upset feelings were treated as a nuisance, where you cried and heard, "Don't be so sensitive." Maybe you opened up to someone you trusted, and they mocked it, dismissed it, or stored it to use later. Maybe you said you were hurting, and instead of comfort, you got a lecture, or silence, or the implied idea that your pain was somehow the problem. So you adapted in the only logical way you could. You went quiet, not because you stopped feeling, but because feeling out loud kept costing you. There's a psychologist named Bowlby who built a career around a single idea, that the way we learn to handle emotional hurt comes directly from our earliest close relationships. And what he kept finding was that when those early bonds teach us that being raw gets us more pain, the nervous system files that lesson away. It keeps it, and it pulls it out every single time something cuts, even decades later, even around completely different people. So your silence isn't a character flaw. It's a survival tool your younger self built to protect you. And it worked. Moments planted you survive and got you here. And now, the part that might genuinely surprise you. While everyone else sees stillness, your brain is anything but still. While the moment is spinning and emotions are flying around you, you're doing something distinct. You're processing deeply, quickly, with a thoroughness most people never bring to their emotional lives. Researchers actually looked at the brains of people who go quiet under stress and found that the regions tied to self-reflection, memory, and imagining future outcomes are markedly more active than in the average person. Your quiet might be one of the most mentally occupied states a human can enter. Because here's what's actually running inside that silence. Did I cause this? Have I felt this before? What is this really about? If I speak now, how will it land? And could it break us? You're not dodging the problem. You're testing every angle of it before committing to a word, because speaking before you understand yourself carries real risk. So you wait until you have something worth saying. People see still water and assume nothing's moving. But you've always known still water runs deep. And here's something about you that almost nobody notices. Part of the silence is you shielding instead of pushing to win. If you're honest, you already know this is true. You hold back partly because you understand what's at the bottom of that silence when the pain is fresh. You know that if you open your mouth before you've processed things, what comes out won't be a conversation. It'll be a fire. So you hold it, not to punish anyone, but because you care enough about the relationship not to blast it apart in a moment of raw pain. There's a concept called the window of tolerance, the emotional zone where real communication is actually possible. When you're outside that window, flooded too deep in it, nobody hears anything clearly and nothing gets fixed. You knew this intuitively all along. That's why you wait. As uncomfortable as it makes others, your silence is often the most protective thing you know how to do. You're not avoiding the talk. You're waiting until you're capable of having it. And now the painful irony, the one that stings. What would actually help you open up is almost always the opposite of what you get. People push. They follow you room to room. It's not fair. You can't shut me out. Just talk. And every time that happens, it confirms what you've quietly believed, that your way of feeling isn't valid, that your emotions are only welcome if they're instant and verbal and on someone else's clock. What you actually need is the hardest thing to ask for: patience without pressure. Someone who can sit in the discomfort of your quiet and trust that you'll return. Someone who doesn't turn your stillness into a problem about them. The research backs this too. When people who process inward aren't forced to perform feelings on demand, they open up far more. Not because they had to, because for the first time it actually felt safe. And it's worth sitting with this last truth. Because you don't speak until you're ready. When the words finally come, they mean everything. You've turned them over 100 times before releasing them. You've checked them for accuracy, fairness, and truth. You don't say things you don't mean, or throw accusations to console a win. When you finally open up, it's not a reaction, it's a conclusion. That's rare. In a world where everyone says everything immediately and means half of it, you say less and mean all of it. The people who've been patient enough to wait for you know this. When you speak, it holds weight. That's not emotional unavailability. That's emotional integrity. And there's a difference. So when you put it together, you go quiet because your nervous system protects you. Because you learned early that softness had a price. Because your brain processes hurt with a depth most never reach. And because part of you is always quietly guarding the people you love, even from yourself. You are not cold. You're not manipulative, broken, difficult, too much, or not enough. You're someone who feels completely and refuses to speak before you understand it. In a world that rewards the loudest, fastest reaction, your careful way of moving through pain will always be misread by the wrong people. But the right people will learn to sit in your silence without fear. They'll learn your stillness isn't distance, it's presence, the deepest kind. And one day, you'll find it easier to let someone in before you've worked it all out. Not because the quiet was wrong, because you finally feel safe enough to not need it so much. That's not a flaw you're fixing. That's long overdue healing. And the fact that you're here, trying to understand yourself, means it's already started. If it felt like someone finally handed you words for something you've carried for a long time, share it with the quiet one in your life. Subscribe to MindToAct for more psychology that decodes how the mind actually works.